Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So without further introduction, I'm just gonna jump right into it. This is what we're gonna be creating today. Just gonna let it play through. So this is a water logo morph using the body force in using VFX in 3ds Max. I'm doing this tutorial right now because I asked you earlier today on my Instagram which one of these two I should make a tutorial for, and people voted for this one, so that's what I'm gonna do. If you'd like to have a say in what I do next, follow me and vote. It's just been kind of fun for me to do this, even though I'm eventually gonna do this one too, but it's just fun to do. So this is what we're gonna be creating. It's a very simple setup. I think what kind of sells it is just the environment and the reflections in the water that make it look cool, but it's a very sort of simple body force setup, very similar to the first tutorial that I posted 2 days ago, which basically uses the same technique just to create a different kind of effect. So we're gonna go to 3ds Max here. And this should be your starting scene. Just create whatever text you want, or it can be an object, it can be a teapot, whatever you want. It's going to work. I'm using the letters FX just because they're pretty defined and clear. So just like in any other tutorial, you want to go to unit setup and make sure that you're in metric centimeters and your 1 unit is 1 centimeter. This will be the same for all of my videos. So if you want your result to look similar to mine, you just want to plug in my values and get what I got. Make sure that you're working in the same scale, because if you're not, it's gonna look completely different. So this is not a scene that's done to real world scale. The letters are probably huge. I always say this, that I like to make my objects bigger just because it gives me more detail in the liquid. So we can go to VFX, Liquid Sim, Auto Grid, and just make a simulation box around the letters. We're gonna want to make it comfortably large because we're gonna have, the water basically coming from the corner here and filling up the letters, and you can see that some of the drops kind of go around and stuff like that. So you want to have a grid that's going to encompass the whole thing. Then we can make our emitter, which is going to be 2 cylinders. So just make a regular cylinder here, drag it to the bottom. You don't need the whole cylinder to be within the simulation area, just the polygon or the face that is going to actually be emitting the liquid needs to be inside the box. So positioning like this is completely fine. You want to convert it into an editable poly. Select polygon, select this one, make it set ID 6. Then you can hit Ctrl-I and set ID 5. Then select the element, the whole thing, hold shift and drag with your mouse to duplicate it. Clone to element, that's fine. Let's just check that this is indeed polygon, set ID 6, set ID 6, 5, 5. Okay, so that's perfect. So even though these are 2 cylinders, this is actually 1 object. That's important. So we can rename the object emitter cylinders. And now you can go to helpers, VFX, liquid source, drag it into the viewport, go to the modify panel and select the emitter cylinders. So the outgoing velocity should be 25. So, if you were doing this from scratch, you would have to play with this value to find out the right amount of speed and liquid and the right amount of duration for it to last to fill the letters just right. So I'm gonna show you a little bit what my sort of trial and error process is, but basically I will set the simulation settings really low and just let the simulation run. And once I feel like, oh, that's probably a good amount of liquid to make this work, I will just set the velocity to 0. And the great thing about Phoenix is that you can mess with the settings as the simulation is running, and they will update in real time. So you can just start the simulation, let it run for 100 frames, set velocity to 0, and then just wait and see if the liquid will settle into looking good. You know, if there's too much liquid, you're gonna lose the detail. If there's too little liquid, it's not gonna fill the letters completely. So it's just something you have to play with for a little bit. Down here we have to set polygon ID 6, and I'm going kind of fast here because this is the same as in my previous videos. So, you know, if you need to just pause the video, you know, go back, replay this, but I'm gonna just try and get through this one pretty quickly. So the outgoing velocity should be animated from frame 0 to frame 150 to be 25. So we can set a keyframe here and then go to frame 150, set another keyframe, and then make this 0. So this should be 25. So again, from frame 0 to frame 150, the outgoing velocity should be 25. And then from basically on frame 151, it should go to 0. So no more liquid is coming out at that point. Just go to the grid, and for my grid settings, I'm just gonna leave them low res right now, just so we can test it. For the dynamics, what I did was I made steps per frame 2, but you can raise this up later. I actually left everything else the same, except there is no gravity. So that's good. Then you want to go to output and output grid channels, check velocity so that you can actually render this with motion blur. If you don't check velocity here before you simulate, even if you add motion blur in your camera or in your render settings, the liquid will not render with motion blur. So this is a crucial step here. You want to set the folder in which to save the simulation data. So I'm just gonna say tutorial cache, and that looks good for now. So now we can do the actual body force, probably the most important thing here. So under helpers, you can go to body force, make that. For the body, this is the object that the liquid in the scene will be attracted to. So select the letters, effects, right click, go to object properties and make it not renderable. It is renderable by default, but make it like this so it doesn't render in the scene. And then you want to right click again, go to Phoenix FD properties and uncheck solid object. What this means, if it is a solid object, then the liquid will hit the geometry and interact with it. If you uncheck it, the liquid will still be attracted to the letters, but it will not interact with the geometry letters. It will not bounce, and it will be able to actually go inside. So if you watch it here, you can see that the liquid sort of, you know, follows the shape of the letters, but it also going inside and is going through to the other side. That's what I wanted to happen. If I left the geometry as solid object, the liquid will only be able to go around and leave the inside hollow, which didn't really look that good. So I didn't go with it. And for my other settings, what I did was strength, I did 200. I already went over the details of what each of these settings is in the first video on my channel, but just very quickly, strength is how fast or with how much force the liquid will be coming out and approaching the geometry. Max distance I set to 300, and this just means that the emitter needs to be within 300 centimeters of the object. If it is any further than 300 centimeters, then it will not be attracted to the geometry. So, you know, this can be pretty much like any number, but I just don't like the infinite number that was there before. It's kind of just distracting. So I put 300 centimeters here. Fade start affects the max distance, don't worry about that. Suppression orbit, so basically you can kind of see that here. The liquid is approaching the letters pretty quickly. So quickly, in fact, that it's coming out on the other side, and then it's kind of like rotating back, and it's kind of being a little violent and going around trying to find its place. So suppression orbit basically stops it from happening. If I were to set this to 1 instead of 0.5, it would reduce this effect and it would force the liquid to stay in place rather than doing all this cool stuff. So I kind of set it to half. You can only go between 0 to 1. So I did 0.5. Internal damping is very similar to suppress orbit in the sense that it's affected by the damp minimum velocity, meaning any liquid that is moving faster than 20 centimeters will be affected by a drag force. So that's what internal damping is. It's basically a drag force, meaning it slows any liquid down that is moving faster than 20 centimeters. So you can kind of see it here. The liquid approaches the letters pretty fast, and then as it's trying to take shape, it's slowing down, getting slower, slower, and slower. And if I were to leave this simulating, it would ultimately come to a stop. And how quickly it would come to a stop is affected by the damping and the minimum velocity. I wanted it to be kind of wobbly because I wanted it to still look like water. So that's why I chose the settings I chose, but it's good for you to know what each of these do. And for spread speed, I actually did 0 here. I think this might be a little bit of a bug because spread speed should be how fast the liquid is spreading across the geometry to fill it evenly. I set it to 0, so I think that because I had so much liquid here all over the place, the spread speed didn't even really make a difference, and I ended up with the effect that I wanted anyway. But if let's say the letters were much bigger, the spread speed would matter in a sense that if let's say the liquid were to hit the letter here, it might take a certain amount of time for the liquid to get from this point here to this point here, and how quickly it would get from here to here is affected by the spread speed. So these were the settings that I went with, and essentially at this point I would just go to simulation and hit start. And you can see it's going pretty quickly. We have a very low res sim. So this is just the fun part. Basically, you get to just watch this happen. And again, you know, here you can see the suppress orbit. The liquid is going back first. And now it's getting affected by the body force. It's being pulled back. Going back to the letters. And slowly filling in the scene. This looks a little different from my example because actually this is a newer version of Phoenix. This one was made in the older version, so I'm getting a little more of a violent result here. but I think this is actually really cool. I would probably I would increase the press orbit here, and I would increase the damp velocity. But also what I found is that after you go for your final simulation, meaning you increase the cell size or decrease the cell size and increase the total resolution of the scene, it will change how things are moving. So what I found is that if it's a low res sim, you're gonna get more violent results like that than if you raise the resolution. Then it's gonna calm down a little bit and not be as strong. Okay, so I went with 30 million particles, which is not a whole lot. So you don't need much to make something like this look pretty good. You can tell that it's kind of chunky. If I increased the resolution to maybe 100 million particles, 0.2 centimeters, you would get a lot more detail. But this was just a quick fun project, so I wasn't trying to do anything crazy. So after you simulate your scene, one thing to know about rendering water is that water only takes on basically the color of and the reflections of its environment. This would not look good if it was rendered just against a black background. So that's the reason why it's rendered in this kind of a kitchen, because you get all of these beautiful reflections within the water surface, which makes it look pretty. So what I did was I have this little kitchen scene. These are just models that I found online, and I'm just gonna unhide my lights too, just super simple, 2 lights. And then I created the camera somewhere here, so Control C, make a camera. And I think I animated the camera going from like left to right like that. And maybe you can switch to local, zoom in a little bit, so that this would be your final movement, just like in my example here. And also what you want to do before you render this out is make a simple water material. So the way to make water is just to go under standard, V-Ray, material, make the diffuse black, make reflect white, make refraction white. I think you have to mess with the IOR. Yeah, so make IOR 0.3 instead of 1.3 like that. And apply the water material to your Phoenix FD. What I also do after I have my water data already in there is I will go to object properties and display as box, just so you only see the water, you don't see the geometry because it can be distracting. And then you want to go to render setup, render elements, add V-Ray Z depth, and set the minimum and maximum Z depth plane. So here what I did was 200 to 380, but you just go to the camera, play with the target distance, so you could do something like 420 till 250. So 420 would be the high, 250 would be the low distance. And then after you render it out, you will end up with a Z depth pass that looks like this. And then you can apply the Frischluft depth of field. I explained how to do this in the previous video, which was this one. So if you want to know exactly step by step how I use this plugin, you can watch that video. But basically it just gives you a depth of field based on a Z depth pass that you provided like that. And I applied some basic curves to give it some contrast, just like that. and that's it. That's the effect. So again, you know, I kind of talk a lot about everything because I'm trying to explain you how stuff works, but you can basically set something like this up in 5 minutes and then just, you know, let it sim for a few hours, give it some good detail and give it some nice environment to reflect. And that's that. So thank you so much for watching. This is the 3rd episode of my Phoenix FD tutorial series. I will try and post 1 video a day. I'm gonna be posting the new poll for which one should be the 4th episode later tonight. So follow me and vote. It's fun, and I'll see you next time.